The sound of a pistol being cocked echoed through the saloon as Francine Thompson stared down the barrel, her hands trembling but her gaze steady. Her father's ranch, her only inheritance, had been sold from under her, and now she was being auctioned off like cattle to the highest bidder. $10,000, called a gravelly voice from the back of the room. Elliot Warner, a man 30 years her senior with tobacco-stained teeth and hands rough from years of questionable dealings, grinned as he stepped forward. For the Thompson land and the girl. It was 1875 in Austin, Texas, and Francine had spent the week following her father's funeral discovering just how quickly a woman could lose everything. Her father's gambling debts had accumulated to an amount she couldn't fathom, and the bank had seized their property before she'd even finished mourning. Now, the saloon owner had arranged this grotesque auction to settle the remaining debts, with her as the prize. That ain't right. A deep voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. A tall man stepped forward, pushing his hat back to reveal sun-weathered features and eyes as blue as the Texas sky. The land's already gone. You're just selling a person now, and last I checked, that ain't legal, not even in Texas. Francine's heart hammered in her chest as the stranger approached the makeshift auction block. He couldn't be more than 30, with broad shoulders and a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room. "Name's Matthew Fullerton," he said, addressing both her and the impromptu auctioneer. "I've got a spread about 20 miles north. And I reckon this young lady deserves better than being sold off to settle a dead man's debts." Warner spat on the floor. "She's got nothing. No money, no family. What else is she supposed to do? Work in a saloon?" His eyes raked over her figure in a way that made Francine's skin crawl. Matthew's jaw clenched. "I've got 3,000 acres and a house that needs a woman's touch. Miss Thompson can have her own place there. Work as my housekeeper if she wants to earn her keep. But she'll be free to leave whenever she chooses." The saloon owner looked between Warner's money and Matthew's stern expression. "Warner's offering 10,000. For what?" Matthew challenged. "The land's already bank property. You're just selling her, and that's not your right." A tense silence fell over the room. Francine watched as the saloon owner's resolve wavered. She knew nothing about this cowboy, but something in his steady gaze gave her hope. "I'll build you a home on my land," Matthew said softly, speaking directly to her now. "It won't be the Thompson place, but it'll be yours for as long as you need it." Francine swallowed hard. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because my ma taught me that's what decent folks do," he replied simply. Before Warner could protest further, Matthew stepped up and offered his hand to Francine. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her trembling fingers in his. "This ain't over, Fullerton," Warner snarled as they headed for the door. Matthew didn't look back. "Yes, it is." Outside, the Texas sun beat down mercilessly as Matthew helped Francine onto his horse. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't thank me yet. It's a hard ride to the ranch, and the accommodations are simple, but you'll be safe there." As they rode away from Austin, Francine clutched Matthew's waist, wondering what fate awaited her on this cowboy's land. She'd lost everything: her father, her home, her security. But for the first time in weeks, she felt something stir within her that she'd thought had died with her father: hope. The journey to Matthew's ranch took nearly 5 hours, during which Francine learned that he'd built his spread from nothing after returning from the war. He'd fought for the Union, though he was Texas-born and raised, which had made returning home difficult. "Most folks have let bygones be bygones," he explained. "But there are some who still hold a grudge." "Like Warner?" she asked. Matthew nodded. "He lost 2 sons fighting for the Confederacy. Blames folks like me for it." As the sun began to set, they crested a hill, and Matthew reined in his horse. Before them stretched a valley with a modest but well-kept ranch house, a barn, and several fenced pastures where cattle grazed. "It's not much," he said, "but it's mine. Paid for free and clear." Francine took in the peaceful scene. "It's beautiful." When they reached the house, an older woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Matthew Fullerton, you were supposed to be back hours ago," she exclaimed, then stopped short when she saw Francine. "And who might this be?" "Mrs. Oakes, this is Miss Francine Thompson. She'll be staying with us for a while." Matthew helped Francine down from the horse. "Miss Thompson, this is Mrs. Oakes, my housekeeper, and the closest thing to a mother I've had since mine passed. Mrs. Oakes gave Francine a quick assessment, noting her fine dress now covered in dust and the exhaustion evident on her face. Well, you look dead on your feet, child. Come inside, and I'll draw you a bath. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and clean floors. Mrs. Oakes showed Francine to a small bedroom off the main hall. This used to be Matthew's sister's room, before she married and moved to California. The older woman explained. It's yours for now. After bathing and changing into a nightgown Mrs. Oakes had lent her, Francine joined them for a late supper. Matthew explained her situation to Mrs. Oakes, who clicked her tongue in disapproval. Disgraceful, trying to sell a person like that. You did right bringing her here, Matthew. Later, as Francine lay in bed staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, she tried to make sense of the day's events. By all rights, she should be terrified alone on a stranger's ranch, miles from town. Yet something about Matthew Fullerton's quiet strength reassured her. He'd said she could leave whenever she chose, which meant she wasn't truly trapped. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Francine woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in the same travel-worn clothes from the day before, making a mental note to ask about purchasing some fabric to make new garments. In the kitchen, Mrs. Oakes was busy at the stove while Matthew sat at the table reading a newspaper. Good morning, Francine said hesitantly. Matthew looked up, and for a moment, he seemed struck speechless. With her hair loose around her shoulders and the morning light illuminating her features, Francine's beauty was undeniable. Morning, Miss Thompson, he finally said, standing. Did you sleep well? Better than I expected, she admitted. And please, call me Francine. Francine it is, then. After breakfast, Matthew showed her around the ranch. The main house had 4 bedrooms, a study, a large kitchen, and a comfortable sitting room. Behind it was a vegetata garden, a chicken coop, and a small orchard. Beyond that lay the barn, bunkhouse, and corrals where several cowboys were already at work. I've got 8 men working for me, Matthew explained. Good men, all of them. They stay in the bunkhouse, except for Hank, my foreman. He's got a cabin near the north pasture. As they walked, Matthew pointed out a flat stretch of land not far from the main house. That's where I thought I might build you a place. Nothing fancy, just a small house where you can have your privacy. Francine was touched by his thoughtfulness. That's very kind, but I don't want to impose. It's no imposition, he assured her. I've been meaning to build another house anyway, for when my sister visits. Over the next few days, Francine settled into a routine. She helped Mrs. Oakes with the cooking and cleaning, insisting on earning her keep. In the evenings, she, Matthew, and Mrs. Oakes would sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their lives. Francine learned that Matthew had been just 19 when the war broke out, and that he'd returned to find his parents' small farm in ruins. He'd worked as a ranch hand for 5 years, saving every penny until he could buy his own land. Now, at 32, he had one of the most promising cattle operations in the county. For his part, Matthew discovered that Francine was the only child of a once prosperous rancher who had gradually lost everything to drink and gambling after her mother died of influenza when Francine was 16. Despite her father's failings, she'd managed the household and even helped with the ranch accounts, revealing an intelligence and practicality that impressed Matthew. You know more about running a ranch than most men I know, he remarked one evening as she helped him review his ledgers. Francine smiled ruefully. Fat lot of good it did me. I couldn't save my father's ranch. That wasn't your responsibility, Matthew said gently. Your father made his choices. A week after her arrival, Matthew drove Francine into town to purchase supplies. Austin was bustling with activity, and Francine felt self-conscious in her borrowed dress as they made their way to the general store. Mr. Fullerton, the storekeeper, greeted them. And Miss Thompson, heard you were staying out at the Fullerton place. Francine nodded politely, aware of the curious stares from other customers. News traveled fast in small communities. As Matthew arranged for feed and other ranch supplies, Francine selected fabric, thread, and other necessities. When they reached the counter to pay, a familiar voice called out, Well, if it isn't Fullerton and his new acquisition." Elliot Warner stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 rough-looking men. Matthew's posture stiffened, but his voice remained calm. "Warner, we're just doing some shopping. Don't want any trouble." Warner approached slowly. "Heard you're building her a house. Must be a special arrangement you two have." Francine felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but Matthew's hand on her arm steadied her. "Miss Thompson is my guest," Matthew said firmly. "And what I do on my property is my business." Warner's eyes narrowed. "You know, that Thompson land would have completed my holdings quite nicely. I was planning to run a railroad spur right through it, connect to the main line in San Antonio. Like I said, that's the bank's concern now, not mine or Miss Thompson's." After a tense moment, Warner backed away. "Just watch yourself, Fullerton. Texas ain't kind to Union sympathizers who get too comfortable." Once Warner had left, the storekeeper let out a low whistle. "You've made yourself an enemy there, Matthew." "He was already an enemy," Matthew replied, helping Francine gather their packages. "Let's head back to the ranch." On the ride back, Francine was quiet, processing Warner's veiled threats. "I'm sorry I've brought trouble to your door," she finally said. Matthew's expression softened. "Warner's been looking for reasons to cause trouble since I bought this land. Don't blame yourself." When they returned to the ranch, they found Mrs. Oakes in a state of agitation. "There were men here," she said as soon as they entered the kitchen. "3 of them, asking questions about you, Miss Thompson, and looking around the property." Matthew's face darkened. "Warner's men, I'd wager. Did they threaten you?" "Not in so many words," Mrs. Oakes replied. "But they weren't friendly." That night, Matthew set 2 of his ranch hands to keep watch. Francine lay awake for hours, guilt gnawing at her. She'd brought danger to these people who had shown her nothing but kindness. Just before dawn, she made a decision. Packing the few belongings she had accumulated, Francine wrote a brief note thanking Matthew and Mrs. Oakes for their hospitality. She would go to San Antonio, find work as a seamstress or shop girl, and remove the threat her presence posed to the Fullerton ranch. As she crept through the pre-dawn darkness toward the stables, a voice stopped her. Going somewhere, Matthew emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Francine straightened her shoulders. "I'm causing you problems. It's better if I leave." "Better for whom?" he asked, stepping closer. "Not for you, riding alone through dangerous country. And certainly not for me, wondering if you're safe." "Warner won't stop," she argued. "He'll keep coming after you because of me." Matthew shook his head. "Warner's been looking for excuses to come after me for years. If it wasn't you, it'd be something else." He took her bag gently from her hands. "I promised you a home here, Francine. I mean to keep that promise." Something in his tone made Francine look up sharply. In the growing light, she could see an emotion in his eyes that made her heart race. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do all this for me?" Matthew was silent for a long moment. At first, it was just the right thing to do. But now, he hesitated. "Now I can't imagine this place without you in it." Before Francine could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Matthew tensed, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get inside," he ordered. "Wake Mrs. Oakes and stay in the root cellar until I come for you." Francine wanted to argue, but the grim determination on his face stopped her. She grabbed her bag and ran for the house. Mrs. Oakes was already awake, having heard the commotion. Together, they hurried to the root cellar beneath the kitchen, a space Matthew had reinforced as a safe room in case of Indian attacks. Through the small ventilation gaps, Francine could see Matthew and his men forming a defensive line as Warner and at least a dozen armed riders approached the main house. "Warner," Matthew called out. "This is private property." Warner reined in his horse. "I've come for what's mine, Fullerton. The Thompson girl. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way." "She doesn't belong to you or anyone else," Matthew replied steadily. "And she's under my protection now." Warner laughed harshly. "Protection? Is that what you call it? Word is you're building her a little love nest right on your property." "What I do on my land is my business," Matthew repeated. "See, that's where you're wrong," Warner said, his tone hardening. "When you interfere with my business deals, it becomes my business. That girl was part of my arrangement with the saloon owner." "An illegal arrangement," Matthew pointed out. "Selling people isn't legal in Texas anymore, Warner." "Not since the war you're so fond of reminding me about." For several tense moments, the two groups faced off in silence. Then Warner signaled to his men, who spread out in a threatening semicircle. I'm taking her, Fullerton, one way or another. In the root cellar, Francine made a decision. She couldn't let people die because of her. Despite Mrs. Oak's protests, she pushed open the cellar door and stepped outside. I'm here, Mr. Warner, she called, walking steadily toward the standoff. There's no need for bloodshed. Matthew's face went pale. Francine, get back inside. She ignored him, continuing until she stood between the two groups. Mr. Warner, whatever claim you think you have on me is false. I am a free woman, and I choose to stay here at the Fullerton Ranch. Warner's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little, that's enough, Matthew cut in, moving to stand beside Francine. You heard the lady. Now take your men and get off my property. For a moment, it seemed Warner might order his men to attack anyway. But Matthew's ranch hands had used the distraction to position themselves strategically, and the odds no longer looked favorable. This isn't over, Warner snarled, wheeling his horse around. Not by a long shot. As the riders departed, Matthew turned to Francine, his expression a mix of relief and anger. That was incredibly dangerous. They could have taken you, or worse. I couldn't hide while you faced danger because of me, she replied, her hands trembling now that the immediate threat had passed. Matthew's anger faded, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. Francine, do you understand what just happened? Warner isn't going to stop. By standing up to him, you've made yourself a target. I was already a target, she pointed out. At least now I'm facing it on my terms. That evening, after ensuring the ranch was secure, Matthew found Francine sitting alone on the porch, staring at the stars. I've been thinking, he said, taking the seat beside her. We need to make your position here more official. Francine looked at him questioningly. Official? Matthew cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. Warner and his kind will always see a single woman as fair game. But a married woman, the wife of a property owner, would have certain protections. Her heart skipped a beat. Are you proposing a marriage of convenience, Mr. Fullerton? No, he said after a pause. I'm proposing a real marriage. If you'll have me. Francine stared at him, stunned. We barely know each other. I know enough, Matthew said quietly. I know you're brave and kind and smarter than most people I've met. I know that in the short time you've been here, you've made this house feel more like a home than it has in all the years I've owned it. He took her hand gently. I'm not asking out of pity or just for protection, Francine. I'm asking because I've come to care for you deeply. I believe we could build a good life together. Tears welled in Francine's eyes. Matthew, I don't know what to say. You don't have to answer right now, he assured her. Think about it. But know that whatever you decide, you'll always have a place here. Over the next few days, Francine considered Matthew's proposal carefully. She couldn't deny the growing attraction between them, or the sense of belonging she'd found on his ranch. But was it enough to base a marriage on? One afternoon, she rode out to the spot where Matthew had started building her house. The foundation was laid, and the frame was beginning to take shape. As she stood there, imagining the life she might lead in this place, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Matthew dismounted and walked over to join her, his expression uncertain. Do you like it? Francine looked around at the half-built structure. It's going to be lovely. But Matthew, I've been thinking about your proposal. His face remained carefully neutral. And, if I marry you, she said slowly, I wouldn't want to live in a separate house. I'd want to share your home, as a real wife. Hope dawned in Matthew's eyes. Does that mean? Francine nodded, a smile spreading across her face. Yes, I'll marry you, Matthew Fullerton. Not for protection or security, but because I've fallen in love with you. Matthew closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. When he set her down, his eyes were shining with emotion. I love you, Francine Thompson, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Their first kiss was sweet and filled with promise, sealing a bond that had formed against all odds. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Austin, with Mrs. Oakes and Matthew's ranch hands in attendance. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and as they exchanged vows, Francine felt her father's presence, approving of the man she had chosen. Warner made no appearance, though they'd heard rumors he was planning something. Matthew had arranged for extra security, but the day passed peacefully. Their return to the ranch as husband and wife was celebrated with a feast prepared by Mrs. Oakes, and an evening of music and dancing in the yard. As night fell, Francine found herself alone with Matthew for the first time as his wife, nervous but eager to begin their life together. "What about the house you were building me?" she asked as they prepared for bed. "What will happen to it now?" Matthew smiled, pulling her close. "I thought it might make a nice place for Mrs. Oakes. She's always said she'd like a bit more independence." Francine laughed. "She'll appreciate that, though I think she enjoys mothering you too much to move far away." Their first months as husband and wife were filled with adjustments and discoveries. Francine took over the household management and began helping Matthew more extensively with the ranch business, revealing a shrewd mind for figures that helped increase their profits. Matthew, in turn, showed Francine the joy of working the land, teaching her to ride properly and involving her in decisions about the ranch. Their love deepened with each passing day, growing from the initial spark of attraction into something solid and enduring. For months after their wedding, the threat they'd been anticipating finally materialized. Warner, having failed to intimidate them directly, filed a legal claim against the Fullerton Ranch, alleging that Matthew had obtained part of his land through fraud during the post-war confusion. "It's nonsense, of course," their lawyer assured them. "Mr. Fullerton's title is clear. But Warner has influential friends, and these proceedings could drag on." Matthew was furious but determined. "He won't take what's ours, Francine. I promise you that." The legal battle consumed much of their time and resources over the next 6 months. Witnesses were called, documents examined, and at times it seemed Warner might actually succeed in his scheme to seize at least part of the Fullerton property. Through it all, Francine stood firmly by Matthew's side, researching land records, interviewing old-timers who remembered the original boundaries, and even traveling to the state capitol to search for additional documentation. It was Francine who finally discovered the evidence that turned the tide, a set of survey maps and deed registrations that proved conclusively that Matthew's claim to the land was legitimate and predated Warner's supposed interests. When the judge ruled in their favor and dismissed Warner's claim entirely, the victory was as much Francine's as Matthew's. "We did it," Matthew said, swinging her around in celebration outside the courthouse. "And you were magnificent." Warner, watching from across the street, approached them with a cold fury in his eyes. "This isn't over, Fullerton." "Not by a long shot." Matthew met his gaze steadily. "Yes, it is, Warner. The court has spoken. Come near my family or my property again, and you'll answer to the law." Warner's face contorted with rage, but he turned away without another word. Later that night, as they lay in bed discussing the future, Francine placed Matthew's hand on her stomach with a smile. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. "We're going to have a baby." Matthew's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to pure joy in the space of seconds. "A baby? Are you sure?" Francine nodded. "Mrs. Oakes confirmed it last week. I wanted to wait until this business with Warner was settled to tell you." Matthew gathered her in his arms, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me everything, Francine. A home, a future, and now a family. You gave me those things first," she reminded him. "When you said you'd build me a home on your land, I never imagined it would lead to this much happiness." 6 months later, Warner left the territory after a series of failed business ventures, moving to New Mexico to try his luck there. Without his malevolent presence, the Fullerton Ranch flourished, expanding its operations and becoming one of the most prosperous in the county. In the spring of 1877, Francine gave birth to a healthy boy they named James, after her father. As she watched Matthew holding their son for the first time, tears of joy streaming down his face, Francine reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation of nearly being sold to pay her father's debts to finding love and purpose with a man who had valued her freedom above all else, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. 2 years later, their family grew again with the birth of a daughter, Emily. By then, the house Matthew had initially started building for Francine had been expanded into a comfortable cottage where Mrs. Oakes lived, though she spent most days in the main house, helping with the children and refusing to fully retire despite Matthew and Francine's insistence that she had earned her rest. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Matthew surprised Francine with a deed. "What's this?" she asked, opening the official-looking document. "The Thompson land," Matthew explained. I bought it from the bank last month. It's yours again. Francine stared at the deed in disbelief. But how? Why didn't you tell me? Matthew smiled. I wanted it to be a surprise. We don't have to do anything with it right away. It can be a legacy for James and Emily, or we could develop it ourselves if you want. Tears filled Francine's eyes as she thought of her childhood home, now restored to her family. Thank you, she whispered, embracing him. For everything. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Francine leaned against Matthew's shoulder. Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't walked into that saloon that day? She asked. Matthew's arm tightened around her. Sometimes. But then I remember something my father used to say, that the best things in life find us when we're busy doing what's right, not what's easy. And was I the best thing? Francine teased. Matthew turned to look at her, his expression serious despite her light tone. The very best, Francine Fullerton. You and our children are everything I never knew I needed. As the Texas sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Francine silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her to this man and this home. From being nearly sold along with her land to becoming the cherished wife of a man who had built her not just a house, but a life filled with love, it was a journey she wouldn't trade for all the ranches in Texas. And as Matthew leaned down to kiss her, his lips as familiar now as they were thrilling, Francine knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Not on the land that had once been her father's, but here, on the Fullerton Ranch, with the family they had created together. It was, in every way that mattered, home.